After we collected the eggs out on the spillway there, we bring them in the hatchery, and we just keep them in that tub that you saw out on the dock for about 4 hours. After we've taken the eggs, they start to swell with water, and we call that water hardening. After about 4 hours, we can handle them much more easily than we could out there where they're very fragile and we were stirring them with the feather. So after 4 hours, we can handle them, and then we call jar them up. We put them on these hatchery jars on this, what we call a battery. A hatchery battery is just a series of troughs with fresh water running through each trough. And on the trough are these spigots. And under each spigot is a hatchery jar that looks like this. And there's the jar, and in the middle of each jar is a standpipe that has it's raised off the bottom a little bit. And the water enters the jar down the middle and comes out the bottom of the jar and then goes up and exits the jar on the backside back into the trough. And the water in the battery works its way down through the trough and through all the jars. When the water enters in the middle of the jar and comes down, it exits at the bottom and lofts all the eggs, so that the eggs are continually moving and getting fresh water and oxygen. These eggs that you see here are fairly light in color, and as they age, they become darker and darker until just before they hatch, when they're almost black in color, and you can see the eyeballs of the walleye inside each individual egg, and then they eventually hatch. We can see some of those older eggs on the other side of the battery over here. Here we have some jars that have been on the battery now for almost 3 weeks since these eggs were taken. And you can see how dark in color they are. And if you look closely, you can see the eyeballs of the fish inside of each egg. And there are some fry that are hatching here. As they hatch, we call them fry. And they're swimming up this. They follow the current up to the jar and then eventually out the spigot on the back side of the jar and into these troughs. They work their way all the way down through the troughs and go out a pipe in the bottom of the battery that goes to a large fry tank on the other side of the hatchery. These jars, when they started, had about 350,000 eggs in each jar. You can see some of them, like this one here, about probably a third to a half of that jar is already hatched. You'll notice on the tops of these eggs, there's some white eggs on the very top. Those are eggs that have either died during development or were never fertilized to start with. And we need to siphon those off periodically, or they'll start to get fungus on them, and then they'll stick onto the good eggs, and we'll lose a bunch of eggs. So we need to siphon those off regularly. As the fry hatch, like I said, they go down and eventually come up in a fry tank on the other side on the hatchery, and we'll go over there and look in there. And here we have the fry tank, where the water from the battery comes up in this big tank, and the newly hatched fry swim through, and they come up in the center of the tank. There's a outlet on each end of the tank, and just before the outlet are these very fine mesh screens that keep the fry in the tank and not go down the drain. Right now there aren't a terrible lot of fry in here. When there gets to be 2, 3, 4 million fry, we will take some out and stock them. And we do that with a very fine mesh net, and we dip it out, and there'll be a large mass of fry on the net. And we'll come over here and dump it into a bowl that has water in it that's sitting on this very sensitive electronic scale, and we can weigh the fry. We know how many fry there is per unit weight, and once we know that, we put them in this jar through a funnel. It's just like a 5-gallon camping jug, and we pour the fry in there. We put about 100,000 fry in a bag, and then we put a cap on it that has like a tire stem on it. There's about maybe a third to half full of water here, and then once the cap is on, we pump up the jar the rest of the way with oxygen, pure oxygen. So now we have this bag with about 100,000 fry in it. It's half full of water and the rest is oxygen. And we take this on our trucks and take it out, either out to a lake and stock it, or we can stock it into a rearing pond. We have a number of rearing ponds around the area. And then we go back in the fall and harvest what we call fingerlings out of those rearing ponds, and they're 5 to 7 inches long. And we stock those in the lakes. And that's our hatchery program.